I'm Jake Higgins, and my partner Ethan and I will be talking to you about the appeasement of 1936 to 1938 and why it was so disastrous. Before we get into appeasement though, I want to share with you guys the chaos that leads up to appeasement. In 1918, which we know as the end of the war, as Professor Bruce talked to us before, you guys watch this. I want to talk about how the treaty really messed with Germany and how that leads to appeasement. In the treaty, Germany was hammered because the Allies wanted to make sure they knew that Germany knew that it was their fault for going to war. And so Germany had to eradicate their army. They could only have about 100,000 soldiers in their army, which, yes, that's a lot of people, but in an army sense, and especially in today's age, that's not a lot of soldiers, right? Then they also had to give up they couldn't have any soldiers in the Rhineland, which you can see right here. It's right next to France. And French wanted to have like a feeling of like, that had to have a feeling that they weren't being like watched right next to, like you know how you don't like someone sitting right next to you breathing down your neck, sort of thing. Another thing that the treaty did was Germany had to pay back a lot of money's worth of like just money because war is expensive. We've seen this countless times in history. The 7-Year War, and we see the British having to tax the American colonies for money. Same thing what happened here. The Allies required money from Germany, and Germany didn't have the money because they also were in that war. So that really caused a big struggle for them too. Another big part of the treaty was Germany had to give up a lot of land, and that also us as Americans, we don't know what it feels like giving up a lot of land per se, because we expanded with America's destiny and stuff, and so we don't understand. I can't really describe what it feels like to lose land, but like to the Germans, it really it felt like a gut punch to them, right? And that also just didn't sit well with the Germans. And so with that being said, to narrow it all down, the treaty caused Germany to reduce their military, reduce their land, and pay back a lot. That's just the major points. There's so much more into the treaty that I don't even have time to get into, but those were the three really killer parts that lead into the next struggles. A second big crucial part of appeasement is the 1920s. The 1920s brought a lot of hardship on the Germans. And think about the end of 1920s with the Great Depression in America. That was way worse over here in Germany. The German dollar rose almost 700% in inflation in just the early 1920s alone. A loaf of bread in 1918 was a quarter of a Rhinemark, whereas by 1923, a loaf of bread cost 80 billion Rhinemarks, which is crazy. Imagine paying $80 million for just a loaf of bread. Think of how much a car or a house, even though those were less expensive in the day, think of how much $700 of inflation, or 700% of inflation is. That's a lot. And Germany is still trying to pay back this money. Of the 1920s was Germany's government was in shambles. The Kaiser fled, the royal family was destroyed. Well, the royal family, royal families all over were destroyed. But my point is, the government, it was just thrown up in the air, and no one knew what to do. And that's when different political parties started trying to rise to power. And later on, I'll talk to you guys about one particular party, which I assume you guys will already know, but we'll still get into it because it's a very important part of what leads up to appeasement. If you thought the 1920s was bad, well, buckle up. The 1930s, wildly crazier than the 1920s. For Germany, that is. Even for us, for America, but we won't get into that because we're talking about Germany and the appeasement. 1933, Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. And when he takes control, he has the Nazi Party take control of everything. He demolishes all political parties. He he pretty much just redoes all of Germany. And for those that don't know, Hitler was a World War I soldier for Germany, and also was this close to dying. But some British soldier let him live for some reason, just because he was unarmed in the middle of the field. But that's a little fun fact for another time. My point is, Hitler was just a really patriotic person, but he happened to be a little too patriotic, in which he thought Germany, it was Germany's manifest destiny, if you use it in American terms, to take back their land, to spread all over the world and cleanse the world in a sense, especially with the Aryan race and all. He thought that was the superior race, and that's what leads him into the death of 6 million Jews, which is very sad. But with that being said, Hitler, he started amping up Germany's army, and he started to reinforce the Rhineland, which is this part of land right here. And that's the first signal that led the Allies to say, oh no, something's up. We need to fix this, right? And that's what starts the appeasement work. But the Allies were still kind of like maybe he's done. Maybe he won't do anything else. But then he starts amping up more military, starts building an air force, and he starts to invade other countries. And that's when the Allies start working on appeasement.
Now that we know a little background before the appeasement, I want to talk about the actual appeasement of Germany and how it was disastrous for many countries. First, the appeasement overall was to prevent war with Germany and prevent overall a Second World War. And by doing this, they wanted to make Hitler happy. And so Neville Chamberlain came up with the idea that basically whatever Germany wanted, they were going to give to him and give to Hitler. This appeasement by the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain led to the Munich Agreement. This was between the British, Germany, Italy, and France. And it basically gave Nazi Germany the ability to take over Czechoslovakia like they wanted. This agreement was known as a failure, and it was also known as a betrayal of smaller nations. Ultimately, it failed as Hitler got to take over the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia. The war ended after his invasion of Poland in 1939, as we can see, and this appeasement was just a complete failure. They had Nazi Germany doing whatever they wanted, and they declared war on September 3rd, 1939, and this led to the rise of a totalitarian regime, and it just led to Hitler's rise of power and destruction. Now that you know a little bit about why the appeasement was formed, we'll talk about why it was disastrous and was not at all successful. It led to Nazi Germany and the Nazi expansion, and this agreement allowed Hitler to expand with no consequences at all. It led to many problems, such as remilitarization of the Rhineland in 1936. It led to the annex of Austria in 1938, and also the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia in 1938. France and Britain also showed the rest of the world that aggression was going to be tolerated. And because the appeasement allowed Germany and Hitler to do whatever he wanted, it showed that other countries may be able to do whatever they wanted, I guess within a military standpoint. And also, Hitler's demands in the Treaty of Versailles and past that in this appeasement were somewhat reasonable. So it gave France and Germany and other countries the idea that maybe this wouldn't be so bad if he got what he wanted. And it could ultimately maybe lead to world peace in the end. Well, what they did not look into was that short-term peace could lead. They thought that short-term peace would be better instead of long-term stability, and because they viewed they viewed short-term peace more valuable than a long-term stability. It led to World War II and everything. We all know what happened in World War II. And although the Great Depression was not a fundamental part of this appeasement, it hurt America because Americans were less likely to put their money into the military and funding the military. And lastly, this failure of the appeasement led to the fascism in Europe. I want to dive deeper into the appeasement, and this was a very popular policy among Neville Chamberlain and the comrades around him. People really supported this policy and thought that maybe it would slow Hitler in his ways and him overtaking land and trying to be more powerful. It was obvious what Hitler was about when his forces entered the Rhineland and tried to continue to conquer land. This diplomatic strategy ultimately failed, and Hitler was very aggressive against foreign policy, which scared the British, and they wanted to control him in a way by creating this appeasement. And they really came to this appeasement because they read Mein Kampf, Hitler's book, and realized that his goal was to, in quotes, reshape the map of Europe and gain more power for Germany. Winston Churchill at this time was extremely critical of Hitler, and he warned the British on appeasement in saying that this appeasement would lead to total unmitigated defeat, which ultimately it did, and Hitler got away with a lot of things that he probably shouldn't have. On September 1st, 1939, the British did declare war on Germany after the Munich Agreement, as stated earlier, fell through, and Hitler continued to gain land and take over he got the Sudetenland land in the Munich Agreement, and as he continued to go with his evil ways, they had to declare war, which they wanted to avoid.
Thanks to Ethan, we can see how the poor, looseness of appeasement led to more destruction and chaos, which ended up being World War II and leading into the bloodiest war in world history. And it's not just because of one thing that happened. It was because of a buildup of terrible or poorly controlled areas, such as the 1920s and the rise of Hitler's domain and regime.